What's going on, everybody? It's your favorite introvert here, and today we're going to be going over the Mavic Air, more specifically the best camera settings to get the most out of the Mavic Air. A lot of it is super simple and in the app, and one tip is definitely something to look out for. So without any further ado, let's get into the video. Before I even start a flight, what I'll do is I usually set it on the ground, get a picture of the histogram. If you don't know what the histogram is, it's right here. That is the histogram. So I make sure everything is within the scopes, nothing is overexposed or underexposed. And then I just go ahead and I put it down a little bit. You want to remember, a lot of the times you're going to be filming down at the ground. So unless you have some highly reflective surfaces, you're definitely going to want to check and make sure that you're not overexposed, and you're definitely not underexposed. You have a tendency to become underexposed when shooting on the ground. You want to have the ND and polarizer filters to suit your lighting needs. So usually ND 4 through ND 16 is your best bet for optimal video quality throughout the day. And sometimes on harsh days, if you're flying over rivers or lakes, then you're going to want to pull out a 32. So tip number one is your ND and polarizer filters. Now let's go into the actual camera settings here. So camera settings, again, going back to the ND filters and polarizers. For the best video, you definitely want your shutter speed to be double that of your frame rate or your FPS. So if you're shooting 4K 30 frames per second, you shoot 1/60th with your shutter speed. And I always like to keep the ISO at 100 because that reduces the amount of grain introduced into the picture. Every time you boost the ISO, you have the possibility of introducing grain to your videos or photos, and that's just more work in the end in post than you may want to be doing. So ISO 100, shutter speed 1/60th, and I usually shoot in manual mode. Let's go to our video settings. As you see, it's 4K 30 frames per second. MP4, your auto white balance, you want to make sure that you set it close to what the actual settings are. So if you're filming on a cloudy day, then shoot in cloudy day. You also have the opportunity to shoot in custom, which usually I find that around 5700 and no less than 48 or 4900 on bright days. And I typically go like 5400. You can keep it custom. What this will do, instead of auto white balance, changing the balance of your light as you fly, custom keeps it in one particular setting. Again, that's reducing the amount of work you have to do in post and making sure that, you know, it's as close as possible. And here I have the histogram checked off. My grid lines, I have the grid and diagonals selected, and I save to my SD card. This is what I feel like is the most overlooked out of everything. If you remember, the Mavic Air can shoot at 100 megabits per second, and the card that came with this Mavic Air came with a SDHC. So if you're not familiar with the SD cards, the HC version is capable of shooting high definition at 1080p, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. But what happens is it starts to break down once you get into the 4K and the 24 and the 30 frames per second, just because the amount of data and the amount of information that is having to be wrote to the card. The card just, it gets overworked, overtaxed, and then you're going to start seeing a video degradation. The first thing that you want to pay attention to is the SD card. If you just got your Mavic Air, go ahead, pop it open. If you put your SD card in, now remember, it has internal memory, which internal memory is fine because it can handle the 100 megabits per second. So if you want to, and you don't want to go out and spend the money, use the internal memory and you will be good to go. So helpful tip there. All right, let's go back into the camera settings here. Again, we're going color D-sign like. Why am I using D-sign like? That just gives me a little bit of depth in my photos. It gives me a little bit of dynamic range. And then in my style, I like to shoot -1 on the sharpness, -1 on the contrast, and -2 on the saturation. I find that the Mavic Air comes standard as being just a little bit oversaturated, so I just like to dumb it down in the camera settings, and that way anything that is being applied through whatever color render is happening that DJI allows to do, if you have it set at 0 or +1, I like to wipe that out. I don't want any of that unnecessary color or unnecessary sharpness or unnecessary blurriness. So I just like to wipe it clean, -1 except for saturation, and leave it at that. So let's go ahead and put the bird up in the air and see what she can do.
Take off. As you can see, with just a little bit of adjustment in the Go4 app and the addition of a proper microSD card, you can maximize the video quality of the Mavic Air. This may be a tiny drone, but it sure can pack a punch.
Alright, that's going to wrap it up for this video for the Mavic Air camera settings. I hope you found it helpful. If there are any settings that you feel that I left out, leave them in the comments below. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you use different settings and you find them to look better, definitely leave that in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, and see your settings for the Mavic Air. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. I really appreciate your support, and I look forward to seeing you next time. That's going to wrap it up. I'll see you next video. Thanks for watching.